Well, there's a new law in the country of Germany. It's a law that allows for Nazi soldiers who are still alive to be prosecuted, even though they may not have directly been involved with murder or mass murders. And there's this guy I've been reading about. His name's Oscar Groening. Oscar was the bookkeeper at Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland, one of the most evil, wicked concentration camps under Hitler's regime. Killed thousands and thousands of Jewish people and other innocent people. And Oscar, he didn't have anything directly to do with the gas chambers, but he was the bookkeeper. And this law now allows Nazi soldiers who had any part in the regime of Hitler to be prosecuted. He's 93 years old, and he's in court now being tried for crime. I was reading one article on it, and the guy who was writing the article said he couldn't help but feel pity for Oscar. And at first when I read that, I thought to myself, pity? How could you pity a former Nazi soldier? But then he went on and he talked about how that Oscar was repentant, and he talked about how that Oscar admitted that he was brainwashed, and that talked about how that Hitler had him captivated and the rest of them believing that what they were doing was right and noble. And I began remembering a guy by the name, and we used to call him Brother Washington. In the church I grew up in, we used to address each other as brothers and sisters, kind of like in the Roman Catholic Church. And this guy, we addressed him as Brother Washington. Brother Washington had to be in his 80s or older, and I remember being intrigued by him. He was from Germany. He had married an American and had moved over to the States and was an active part of our church. But not only was he from Germany, he was also a Nazi soldier. He'd been saved since then and repentant. But I remember my parents talking about that one day he had said to them, I never once questioned whether what we were doing was right. He said, it never entered my mind that we weren't fighting for what was right. It never entered my mind that the Jewish people were not the enemy. We were so brainwashed. We were so captivated by the vision of a bright future, of a new future for Germany by Hitler. We were so captivated by his leadership that he convinced us. This morning, I want to talk to you about leadership. Now, Hitler is an extreme example. I understand that. But people who have studied, historians and others who have studied what made Hitler so believable, what made so many people love him so much and want to follow him to do such atrocities, what was it? They narrow it down to two things, and one was his charisma. He had a captivating personality. If you were in his presence, they say, he just made you feel good about being with him, good about yourself. He was able to draw you in with his personality. The second thing, though, that they point to is that he tied his vision in with providence, divine providence. That he would subtly but intentionally wrap up the vision he had for Germany in this is the time that God has provided for us. This is a divine time, a time that we need to take advantage of, a time that God has brought to this country at this time. And he wrapped up his vision in God language and in divine language and in providential language. It's a powerful twofold formula for leaders to cast their vision, to get followers to follow them. If they have a charismatic or a personality that somehow draws you in, and if they can wrap it up in God's will language, they've got it made. And again, as I said, as Hitler is an extreme example, but it's still a twofold formula people use to spiritually abuse other people. It's still, unfortunately, a formula that leaders, even in churches today, will use to manipulate people to cast their vision that they have, their desire that they have to see the future unfold, their desire for you to support what they want done. It's a powerful, powerful recipe that I want us to talk about actually this week and next week. And talk about the dangers of it and look at how we want Wellspring, how we want the leaders of Wellspring to view leadership. But not only Wellspring, not only in the context of our church, all of us or most of us by far are leaders in some way, whether it's in our community, whether it's in our church, whether it's at work, or whether it's in the school system, whatever it is, whether it's a leader being the leader of our home and our children, all of us at some level influence other people. And I want to wrestle and talk about a biblical concept of leadership. We're continuing our series in 1 Samuel chapter 14. If you want to turn there, it's page 266 in the church Bibles. By the way, I like to remind you periodically, if you don't have a Bible or you know someone that doesn't have a Bible, please feel free to take one of these. It's a ministry of the church that we offer here. We have plenty of these Bibles. We want to give anybody that we know of that doesn't have a Bible for free. So feel free to take it with you if you don't have a Bible, or again, if you know somebody that doesn't to have a Bible. But before we get into chapter 14 of 1 Samuel, I want to look at one of the most telling stories regarding Jesus when he's talking to his disciples about leadership and how he explains to them that there's a very different model of leadership than the world will tell you. There's a different model, a model that we often refer to as servant leadership. It's in Mark 10. What's happening is the disciples, Jesus has gathered the disciples. He has told him he's going to make them fishers of men. The disciples, they've read the Old Testament. They're looking for a Messiah. A Messiah was prophesied to come and rescue the children of Israel. Most people thought that this was going to be a person that was come and lead a military regime, that was going to lead and build his kingdom here on earth. And so the disciples thought at first that Jesus was coming to build an earthly kingdom. In Mark 10, James and John, they're walking with Jesus, and they see an opportunity to vie for powerful position. They're looking ahead, and they're thinking, okay, when he does build his kingdom here, no doubt he's going to have a throne. Maybe we should ask if we can be on either side of his throne. They're vying for power, and they asked Jesus, hey, when you do materialize your kingdom here on earth, will you let us be a part of your power structure? Can we assist you as being the king? And this is what Jesus answers them in verse 42 through 45. He says, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Here Jesus says that there are two different types of ways to view leadership. The one is the world's view of leadership. It's selfishly motivated. It's humanly generated. It's motivated out of prestige and an honor and desire for a great name. On the other hand, Jesus says godly leadership is service-oriented. It is motivated out of love for others. It is motivated out of love for God. It bubbles up out of a motivation for a desire to serve others, to offer a bright future for the benefit of others as a result of love for God. This is the type of leader that God desires us to be. Leaders that refuse to give in to the temptation of selfish motivation or ambitions, but seeks to be leaders in our community and in our job and in our home and in our church, that emulates the love of Christ, that seeks to be a servant. It's a very different model than a worldly model or an understanding of a worldly understanding of leadership. Saul, he would be seen as a great leader by all counts today. Remember in Samuel chapter 9, Saul is said to be a head taller than everyone else. He's handsome. He's attractive. He's got that He's got that characteristic that attracts people to him. People enjoy being with him. They enjoy listening to him. That's how he first started to be king. That's how he was first identified as king, as he rallied the troops to take them to fight against the enemy. And so we find ourselves in chapter 14, and as we saw last week, Saul is leading the Israelites in a war against the Philistines, and Saul does what all leaders should do, and that's come up with a plan. He comes up with a plan, and for those of you that weren't here, I want to read verse 24 to review what that plan was for winning the war. Verse 24 of 1 Samuel chapter 14. Now the Israelites were in distress that day because Saul had bound the people under an oath, saying, "Cursed be anyone who eats food before evening comes, before I have avenged myself on my enemies." So none of the troops tasted food. So Saul, here he's the leader of this army, and he comes up with a plan for how he's going to win the war. And his plan is this: no one's going to eat food until we win the war. Now you have to understand, again, as we talked about last week, that fasting was God's idea. God says in his word that he enjoys when his people seek him from fasting. So Saul's automatically just thinking, well, it's a good thing to do. Let's do it. Let's knock down heaven's door, asking God to give us the battle, give us the victory by no one eating food. That's his plan. That's his strategy. Let's read on. Verse 25 and 26. The entire army entered the woods, and there was honey on the ground. When they went into the woods, they saw the honey oozing out, yet no one put his hand to his mouth because they feared the oath. Saul said that, "Cursed be anyone who doesn't follow my plan." Wraps it up in providence, wraps it up in divine language. I've got the word from God. I've got the plan, and God is going to curse you if you don't follow. And it worked in this instance, at least for a bit of time. Fear is a powerful motivation, but it's short-term, it's short-lived. It's one of the most manipulative tactics that people and leaders have used throughout history. You can go to Europe and you can view and tour cathedrals and churches that have been built, beautiful, beautiful churches that have been built on the backs of people who have been told that they were going to hell if they didn't support it financially and with their labor. It's a manipulative tactic that has been used throughout history by leaders and is used by leaders today, unfortunately. Back in the 80s, I remember a preacher, a prominent TV evangelist, had a vision for building a medical facility. He felt like that's what God had asked his church to do, build this medical facility for people who couldn't afford medicine. And noble cause, yeah, God says take care of the poor, right? Well, the money wasn't coming in, and so he decided to announce that God had told him that if he doesn't raise $8 million by a certain amount of time, that God was going to take his life. He raised it immediately. Fear, manipulation, it's powerful. Recently, I listened to a TV preacher. I don't know why I do this. But I was listening, and he literally said, I kid you not, he said, some of you are sick. And the Lord told me to tell you that you're not going to be healed until you give this ministry some money. Fear, manipulation, all for the promotion of a man-made vision. A man-made vision. A vision that on the surface might look noble, on the surface might look great, but because it didn't materialize in God's mind, it's against God's will. And you have to use manipulation and fear tactics to get people motivated. Look what John says in 1 John chapter 4 about fear. He says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. We love because he first loved us. You see what he's saying? He's saying, look, fear is temporary. Fear will always run its course, but love drives fear out. That our motivation for building God's kingdom, our motivation for being leaders we're supposed to be, our motivation for living godly lives should dwell up out of a motivation to love back. We love. Why? Because when we think of the way that he loved us, and when we think of the deep love he has for us, it wells up in us motivation to love him back. And love drives out fear. Parents, how are you leading today? How are you leading your children? Do you find yourself having to threaten your children all the time with acts of punishment? Don't get me wrong, the Bible says we're supposed to punish our kids. God says he punishes his children, and if we're living in unrepentant sin, we should fear, but fear will only take you so far. Love is the prime motivator. Love your children. Make sure they know you love them. That's going to be what motivates them to grow up to be adults that love God and love others. As a pastor, my job isn't to beat you over the head with the Bible. My job isn't to cast some grand vision that you can sink your teeth in, other than this: knowing Christ and knowing him crucified and realizing the love that he has for you. That's what my message is for you. Love God, know him, serve him, and as you get to know him and you experience his love for you, you will be motivated to work for him and to live for him and to build this church and to lead in this community and to work hard unto him because of the love he's demonstrated for you. That's the motivation that gives life. That's the motivation that will last. The first thing I want you to understand today about servant leadership is, being a servant leader, you must motivate your people out of love and not fear. Out of love and not fear. In your workplace, how do you motivate your employees? Do they know you care for them? Do they know you have their back? That's the thing that's going to motivate them to support the well-being of the organization. Servant leadership, the first thing that you need to realize is we need to motivate people by love. Think about Peter. People look at Peter's life, and one of the intriguing things about Peter's life is his life can be separated in pretty much in two. The first part of his life, he's a timid disciple. You know the infamous story of him denying Christ 3 times. People just come up to him and say, "Hey, aren't you a disciple of Jesus Christ?" And Peter says, No, I'm not. Leave me alone. But something happens. Something happens that makes Peter courageous. So much so that he eventually dies as a martyr because he refuses to deny his Lord. What was the difference? It was his motivation of love. In John 18, after he had denied Christ 3 times, and Jesus looks at him and says, "Look, I love you anyways. I paid for that. You're mine. Don't worry about it. Get back up and serve me." Peter recognized the love that God has for him, and he was motivated in turn to work for God and to eventually die for Jesus. The motivation of love is what a servant leader instills in his people. Verse 27. But Jonathan had not heard that his father had bound the people with the oath. So he reached out the end of the staff that was in his hand and dipped it into the honeycomb. He raised his hand to his mouth, and his eyes brightened. Then one of the soldiers told him, "Your father bound the army under a strict oath, saying, 'Cursed be anyone who eats food today.' This is why the men are faint." Jonathan, Saul's own son, had not heard that Saul had ordered that no one was to eat until the war was over. He had not heard that his father had said, "Cursed be anyone who eats." And Jonathan, he's walking through the woods, and he's tired, he's been fighting, and he's lacking energy, and he sees honey. Honey that God had provided. Honey that God had intended to feed and give his soldiers energy. Honey that following a man was denied most soldiers. Jonathan hadn't heard that, and he ate it. And it says that his eyes brightened and he got energy. You see, what happens when a leader stands up and gives what some call a white-hot vision for the future, and he rallies the troops, and he gets them excited, and he's got a plan, and they're going to charge the hill and take it over. If it's not God's plan, the problem is the people miss out on the blessings God has in the journey. I don't care how noble the plan is. I don't care how grand the plan is. If it's not God's plan, it's not the plan you should have. And you miss out on the good things of God. On the surface, it looks like a good strategy. On the surface, it gets the adrenaline pumping. On the surface, it looks like a plan. On the surface, it looks like a white-hot vision that you can sink your teeth in. The problem is, it's not God's plan. I don't know that I've ever been more excited about getting up in the morning and going to work and working on a vision that was set back many years ago. My first ministry job as men's pastor at Fellowship Bible Church in Dallas. It's a great church, and I value my training there. They hired me to, their men's ministry had tanked really, and they hired me to help breathe some life into it. And so they gave me a bunch of guys, great guys that I love to this day, and we got together, and these guys, most of them were businessmen. Excuse me. Most of them were businessmen, and they were used to strategizing and coming up with a plan and coming up with a mission statement and then a strategy to get there. And so we went away on a retreat, and we came up with a great plan, a plan to get 500 men involved in the ministry in 5 years. We came up with a strategy. We had a really good, tight strategy, a road to get to the vision. And it was exciting. There was this one guy particularly that was on my team, and he had a charismatic personality, and he could help me communicate it. And we went back to the church, and we communicated, and then we rallied people together, and people started giving money. And at first, things started really going well. I mean, we worked and worked to make it happen, and then finally, I realized it's not working. As good as a plan as it was, I mean, who could be against getting 500 guys in 5 years involved in men's ministry? Couldn't God be for that? Wasn't what he had for us. How do I know? Because we spun our wheels, we worked to death, we sacrificed our families, we sacrificed our own spirituality and our personal time with God, working together, adrenaline flowing, excitement flowing. The problem was it wasn't God's plan. God's plan is to know Him. And in many ways, we were trading Jesus for a white-hot vision that got people excited, that gave them a fix. Everybody wants to be a part of something big. Everybody wants to know that their efforts and their sacrifices are working towards building the kingdom. And in so doing, people get ahead of God. And in so doing, they come up with a man-made plan. And while it might look noble, and while it might get the blood pumping, and while it might get money coming in, and it might get people all full of energy to do it, in the end, it fizzles, and there's casualties, in the process. Because it wasn't God's plan. I personally know people who have given their life's blood to churches, followed leaders that were charismatic, that had wrapped their vision up in God language and had spent their resources in life only to get burnt out. Because it wasn't God's best. The second characteristic of a servant leader is that they refuse to go beyond the vision God has set. They refuse to give into the temptation and the desire and the insatiable thirst people have for a fix. They refuse to trade Jesus for a grander feat. They refuse to move until God says move. They recognize that the mission is to glorify God by making disciples of Jesus Christ, but they recognize that they dare not make a move until God says go. I mean, that's our mission statement here at Wellspring, to glorify God by making disciples of Jesus Christ. And we could get a bunch of leaders, men and women in a room, and we could strategize, and we could come up with a 10-year plan, and we could cast it to the church and say, give money to this and do that. But in the end, if it's not God's best for us, casualties in the process. People becoming burnt out. We all know those people, don't we? We all know those people that have married themselves to a leader of a church or leader of an organization only to get burnt out. Casualties in the process. Look, drop down to verse 31 and 32. That day after the Israelites had struck down the Philistines from Michmash to Aijalon, they were exhausted. They were exhausted. They pounced on the plunder, and taking sheep, cattle, and calves, they butchered them on the ground and ate them together with the blood. Then someone said to Saul, look, the men are sinning against the Lord by eating meat that has blood in it. Old Testament law said that when you killed an animal, you had to drain the blood out before you could cook it and eat it. It's sanitary. It's healthy to do it that way. We do it that way now, don't we? Hunters, you go out and you kill a deer, you're going to hang it up and drain the blood out of it. Under the Old Testament law, to not do that, it was sin. But notice, these people had followed Saul's vision. They had followed Saul's vision of not eating, and they've been in battle, and they're hungry. They're exhausted, the text says. They're burnt out. They've wasted their energy. They have none left to give. And what happens? What happens when people get burnt out? What happens when people work hard day in and day out and the Holy Spirit isn't partnering with them because it wasn't His vision? They get burnt out, they get exhausted, and often they fall into temptation and sin because it's at that moment that Satan attacks people. I know a guy today, I could give you his name. He, at one time, followed God, and he started going to this church, and he started getting captivated by this leader who was giving him this grand vision for the future. He gave his life's blood. He sacrificed his kids and his family for this. For a noble cause, for building the kingdom, all under the name of God. Today, he's divorced. Doesn't have a great relationship with his kids. Doesn't want anything to do with church. Church ruined his life. No, following a man ruined his life. I hope you see what I'm doing this morning. There is a vision to follow. It's to know Jesus. Don't sell out Jesus for some vision of grander feet. Don't sell out Jesus because you want a fix. Daily walking with Him. Daily being led by Him. Paul says in Philippians 3, Paul throughout his ministry, he would have people that would attack him, and they would say that he wasn't a very eloquent speaker. And he was always, periodically, he was having this conversation with people who would say, well, why don't you preach like so-and-so or lead like so-and-so? And Paul in Philippians 3, he says, look, here's the vision. I didn't come preaching to you in eloquence. I came in preaching to you in the demonstration of the power of God. And how do I know that? Because I gave you the one thing you're supposed to do, and that's to know Christ. That's my goal in life, to know Christ. That's our goal this morning. That's Wellspring's goal this morning, is to know Him. Now, there's nothing wrong with planning. There's nothing wrong with looking into the future and making wise decisions. The problem is we want to get ahead of God. We want to see what's in the future. And more times than not, God's just asking you to be obedient day in and day out. Think about the disciples. Jesus comes to the disciples, he picks them, he says, I want to make you fishers of men. He gives them the grand vision. It's our vision today, fishers of men. That's what I want to make you. And then he just leads them day by day, and they stick with him. And at first, again, the disciples think he's going to build an earthly kingdom. And it takes a while for the clouds to start parting. But as they follow him day by day, as they seek him, as they lay at his feet, as he teaches them, as they run into opportunities for ministry, they do them as they meet the needs of people that they meet the needs, and slowly the cloud starts parting, and they realize what God is really up to. That's the way we walk with God. God hardly ever gives you too far down the road. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet, Psalms 119 says. And it guides you and it leads you. And as you walk along, you see where you're going and you get more confidence. And sometimes God tilts the flashlight up a little bit and you're able to see a little far, but normally not too far. But that's the problem, is people want to know. I've been a part of, prior to this church, 2 different churches. Both were pretty large churches. And one church, not in this state that I was a part of, a great church. They did great things for God. People got saved. But they were fixated on this strategy and on creating a vision and charging the hill and creating this box that they said, this is what God wants us to do, and we're not going to do anything else. We're going to do this. We're going to climb this mountain. And I saw it over and over again, where we rally the troops, we get together, they'd come up with a strategy and a vision, and they'd rally the troops, and people get excited, and adrenaline flowing, people give money, and they'd start charging the mountain, and they'd get about halfway, and they'd realize, well, we're not going to make it all the way to the top. Then they'd go away, and they strategize, come up with another vision, another mountain, and they got some good stuff done. People got saved. But they missed the blessing in the woods. They missed the honey in the woods. The energy that would take them all the way up the mountain. The other church I was more recently a part of was a church, they do things just the opposite. They never get together and strategize. They get together and pray. Sure, I'm not talking about planning. I'm not talking about taking what God has asked and making wise decisions as you go. But they They teach their people, follow Jesus, know Him. And then as people know Him, God starts welling up motivation of love in their hearts, and people start identifying their giftedness, and then they start starting ministries themselves, and they start going out. And that church has done so much more than the first church, so much more productive, just following God day in and day out. Being faithful to do just what He says, but no more. It's a harder model of doing church. It takes tenacity, it takes faith to just trust Him. I really believe this is God sometimes looks down and He looks down and say He wants to start a ministry downtown of some sort. And He looks down and He sees all these churches. Well, they've got their box. They've got what they say they're doing. So He can't really ask them. They're so fixated on what on their vision. But if He looks down and He sees a church that's just seeking Him daily, saying, God, what do you want? What do you want us to do? Lead us and guide us. And they're doing the last thing He told them, and they're being faithful. He's able to use that church more effectively because they're walking with Him. They're like His disciples. They're walking with Him, and they're saying, yes, sir, God, that's what we'll do. A servant leader doesn't motivate out of fear, and a servant leader refuses to go beyond what God has said, regardless of the pressure to do otherwise. Saul motivated his soldiers out of fear, and it was sucking the life out of them. This probably have conjured up a lot more questions than I've answered this morning, but remember, there's a part 2 next week, and we're going to deal with this again. But my encouragement this morning is whether you're a Sunday school teacher, whether you're, well, we don't have Sunday school here, do we? whether you're a small group leader, whether you're a teacher in the school system, that's what I had written down. A member of the security team, an elder, a deacon, a mom, a dad, a leader of your cheerleading squad, whatever it is, seek to be a servant leader, one that loves your people. May they know you love them. I recently watched a video. There's a video on MSN that's up. I just watched it last night, actually, and it's about this teacher. There's just a school that's entitled Success. I think it's in New England somewhere. Success. I mean, that tells a lot, doesn't it? And it's this video that she didn't know she was being recorded. She has these kindergartens around her, and she's sitting there, and she's talking to this one, I don't know if it's kindergarten, it's elementary age. She's talking to this one elementary age girl, and this girl is getting this math problem wrong. And the teacher is berating her and telling her that she's an embarrassment to the rest of the kids and that she's hindering all the rest of the kids because she's getting this math problem wrong that she should know the answer to. And she takes the paper that the student had done the math problem on, and she rips it up and she throws it on the ground. And she tells the student, she says, go sit in a chair across the room. I mean, it's horrid. That teacher still teaches there. Parents rallied. Parents came out and said, but my kid has learned math like crazy. It's been a success. They're living up to their name. That's the worldly type of leadership. That's motivation out of fear. That's manipulation. May we be leaders that love our followers. May we be leaders that reminds them Jesus died for you. How can you do anything less other than know Him and serve Him and live for Him? Let's strive to be servant leaders today. Let's pray. Father God, we thank You. We thank You that You came to earth and You didn't come to manipulate us, or You didn't come, Father, out of selfish ambitions, but You came because You loved us. Father, my prayer this morning is that each of us would feel Your deep love, would experience the love You have for us, God, and would desire truly to live our lives glorifying to You. I pray that none of us, and particularly this church, would trade knowing you for some white-hot vision, Lord. I pray, Lord, that we resist the temptation to motivate our people out of anything other than love. I pray that we'd resist the temptation to get ahead of you. You're enough, God. Knowing you's enough. Sitting at your feet's enough. Knowing you more is enough, God. May we here at Wellspring, Father, follow you, but dare not get ahead of you. In our desire, in our deep desire for this church and this ministry and our lives and our workplaces and our homes to glorify you, may we follow you wholeheartedly. In Jesus Christ's name.